When did we start believing that passion has an expiration date? Picture this. Two people who've shared decades together, lying side by side in the quiet darkness, both yearning for the connection they once knew so easily, yet neither willing to speak the words that might bridge the growing distance between them. It's a scene playing out in millions of bedrooms across America tonight. The desire is still there, burning quietly beneath years of routine and unspoken disappointments. But somewhere along the way, the path to true intimacy became clouded with doubt. Physical changes and the cruel whisper that says their time for such joy has passed. Here's the truth that no one talks about openly. The statistics show that nearly 6 out of 10 women over 45 struggle to find real satisfaction in their most intimate moments, and their partners often feel just as lost, carrying the weight of their own changing bodies and diminished confidence. But tonight, I'm going to share with you 4 specific approaches that have quietly transformed relationships for countless couples who refuse to accept that their meilleurs jours étaient derrière eux. What you're about to discover isn't just about technique. It's about reclaiming something beautiful that belongs to you at every stage of life. Number 1. The silent struggle that no one talks about. Sarah stares at the ceiling again, her husband breathing softly beside her. Another night, another moment that started with such hope, only to end with that familiar ache of incompleteness. She's not alone in this quiet disappointment. Across countless bedrooms, women her age are living with a secret that feels too personal to share, even with their closest friends. The numbers don't lie. Nearly 6 out of 10 women between 45 and 75 find themselves trapped in this same cycle of longing and frustration. Your body has changed over the decades, and those changes run deeper than what you see in the mirror. Sensitivity that once came naturally now requires patience and understanding. Muscles that once responded effortlessly now need gentle coaxing and the right approach. But here's what makes it even more challenging. Your partner is fighting his own battles. Those strong arms that used to support him through passionate moments now ache with joint pain. The stamina he once took for granted has quietly slipped away, leaving behind a man who questions whether he can still be the lover you deserve. This creates a heartbreaking cycle. You both want to connect, to feel that spark that brought you together all those years ago, but neither of you wants to admit that the old ways aren't working anymore. He pushes through the discomfort, trying to prove he's still got it, while you smile and nod, not wanting to hurt his feelings by saying that what used to work simply doesn't anymore. The silence grows, and with it, the distance between two people who love each other deeply. But what if I told you that this struggle isn't a life sentence? What if the solution isn't about turning back the clock, but about embracing exactly where you are right now and learning to work with your bodies as they are today? The couples who have broken free from this cycle didn't find a magic cure for aging. They found something better. They discovered that with the right knowledge and approach, intimacy can actually become richer and more fulfilling than it ever was in their younger years. The key isn't fighting against time, it's learning to dance with it. Number 2. When love learns new steps. Ramesh and Savita had been married for 38 years when they almost gave up on physical intimacy altogether. They'd fallen into that trap that catches so many couples their age, believing that passion is a young person's game. Savita avait convaincu elle-même que sa difficulté à atteindre la satisfaction était juste une partie du fait de vieillir, quelque chose qu'elle devait accepter. Ramesh, meanwhile, was struggling with his own insecurities, worried that his changing body made him less of a man, less worthy of his wife's desire. The turning point came during a conversation that started as an argument about something completely unrelated. In the middle of discussing their grandson's college plans, Savita suddenly broke down and confessed how disconnected she felt, not just physically, but emotionally. That vulnerability opened a door they hadn't walked through in years. For the first time in decades, they talked openly about their intimate life, about what was working and what wasn't, about their fears and their hopes. What they discovered changed everything. Age hadn't stolen their capacity for pleasure, it had simply changed the rules of the game. Instead of relying on old patterns that no longer served them, they began to explore together, communicating openly about what felt good and what didn't. They learned that the positions and approaches that worked in their 30s weren't necessarily the ones that would work in their 60s, and that was perfectly okay. Savita learned to guide Ramesh, showing him what her body needed now. Ramesh learned that his worth as a lover wasn't measured by his stamina, but by his willingness to listen and adapt. Together, they discovered that when you remove the pressure to perform and replace it with genuine curiosity and care, intimacy transforms from something you do to something you share. Their story isn't unique. Across the country, couples like Naresh and Pooja, Gopal, and Meena are writing similar stories of rediscovery. They're learning that age doesn't diminish love, it deepens it. When you've been together for decades, you have something that younger couples don't: complete trust, deep knowledge of each other's hearts, and the wisdom to know that true intimacy goes far beyond the physical. The question isn't whether you're too old to experience profound pleasure together. The question is whether you're ready to discover what that pleasure can look like now. Number 3, 4 paths to rediscovered passion. Margaret had almost forgotten what it felt like to lose herself completely in her husband's touch. After years of polite, routine encounters that left her feeling more frustrated than fulfilled, she'd begun to wonder if that kind of abandon was just a memory from her jeunes années. Then her husband suggested they try something different, something that would work with her body instead of against it. The modified missionary became their first revelation. By simply placing a pillow under Margaret's hips, everything changed. The angle allowed her husband to reach places that had been neglected for years, while taking the strain off his back and knees. What had once been a position that left them both exhausted now became a gateway to the kind of satisfaction Margaret thought she'd lost forever. Studies show that nearly 3/4 of women find greater pleasure when this simple adjustment is made, but the statistics pale beside the look of wonder in Margaret's eyes that first night. Pour couple comme David et Helen, la position side-by-side ouvrait des possibilités entièrement nouvelles. Lying together, bodies aligned, they could maintain eye contact, whisper to each other, synchronize their breathing. Helen no longer had to support her weight or worry about her husband's comfort. David pouvait se concentrer entièrement sur la connexion entre eux, en lisant ses réponses, en suivant son rythme. The position allowed them to move as one, slowly and deliberately, building intensity together rather than racing toward a finish line. The woman on top position gave Linda back something she thought she'd lost forever: control. After years of feeling like a passive participant in her own intimate life, she discovered the power of setting her own pace, finding her own angle, taking charge of her own pleasure. Her husband learned the joy of surrender, of watching his wife reclaim her confidence and sensuality. The position allowed for the kind of clitoral stimulation that many women need but rarely receive, while giving Linda the freedom to move in ways that felt natural and comfortable for her changing body. Finally, the chair position brought couples like Robert and Patricia into a new realm of closeness. Seated together, Patricia on Robert's lap, they could wrap their arms around each other, feel each other's heartbeat, look directly into each other's eyes while they moved together. The position required less energy than traditional approaches, but created more intimacy, more connection. It became their favorite way to rediscover each other, slowly and tenderly with all the time in the world. Number 4. The art of adjustment. Dorothy had always been someone who followed instructions to the letter, whether she was following a recipe or assembling furniture. So, when she and her husband began exploring new approaches to intimacy, she expected there to be a one-size-fits-all formula. What she discovered instead was that her body was unique, with its own needs and preferences that required gentle experimentation and constant fine-tuning. The angle of her pelvis made all the difference in the world. A slight adjustment, a pillow moved un pouce à gauche ou à droite, pourrait transformer une expérience agréable en quelque chose de transcendant. She learned to pay attention to the subtle signals her body was sending, to communicate those discoveries to her husband, to work together to find the precise positioning that unlocked her pleasure. What seemed like small technical details were actually the keys to intimacy she'd been searching for. Movement, she discovered, was like music. The frantic pace of their younger years had given way to something more like a slow dance, where rhythm mattered more than speed. Gentle, deliberate movements allowed her to feel every sensation, to build slowly toward satisfaction rather than rushing toward it. Her husband learned patience, learned to follow her lead, learned that the journey could be just as satisfying as the destination. Comfort became their foundation. Pillows weren't just accessories, they were tools that allowed them to maintain positions longer, to focus on connection rather than physical strain. A towel rolled just right could provide support exactly where it was needed. A chair with the right height could make all the difference between an experience that ended in frustration and one that left them both breathless with joy. These weren't just practical adjustments, they were acts of love. Every pillow carefully placed, every angle thoughtfully adjusted was a way of saying, "Your comfort matters to me. Your pleasure is important." The technical became deeply personal, and the personal became profoundly intimate. Through trial and gentle error, Dorothy and her husband created their own customized approach to lovemaking, one that honored both of their bodies as they were now, not as they used to be. And in that acceptance, they found something more beautiful than anything they'd shared in their youth. Number 5. The language of love. Relearned. For 42 years, James thought he knew how to read his wife's body. He'd memorized the signs that meant she was enjoying herself, the sounds that told him he was on the right track. But as Eleanor began to change, as her responses became more subtle, he realized he'd been operating on outdated information. The quiet moans that used to signal her pleasure had become whispers. The physical cues he'd relied on had evolved. It was like trying to read a familiar book that had been written in a slightly different language. The breakthrough came when Eleanor finally found the courage to guide him with words instead of hoping he'd figure it out on his own. Un peu à gauche, elle a murmuré un soir, et soudain James a compris qu'elle essayait de lui dire des choses depuis des mois sans qu'il l'entende. That simple phrase opened up a conversation they should have been having all along. Instead of relying on guesswork, they began to talk to each other, really talk, during their most intimate moments. Is this good for you? Devant la nouvelle question préférée de James. Not because he doubted himself, but because he genuinely wanted to know. Eleanor learned to answer honestly, not with polite nods, but with real guidance. Slower, she might say, or right there. And James learned to listen not just with his ears, but with his entire attention. The conversation that began in their bedroom spread throughout their relationship, creating a new level of openness they'd never experienced before. Eleanor a découvert que sa respiration racontait sa propre histoire. When she was truly relaxed and present, her breath would deepen and slow. When she was distracted or uncomfortable, it would become shallow and quick. James learned to read these rhythms like a musician reading sheet music, adjusting his approach based on what her body was telling him. She learned to use her breath intentionally, to breathe deeply into the sensations, to let her natural responses guide both of them. The hesitation that used to frustrate them became valuable information. When Eleanor tensed up or pulled away slightly, James no longer saw it as rejection. Instead, he saw it as communication. Her body telling him that something needed to change. A different angle, a gentler touch, a moment to reconnect and breathe together. They learned that every pause was an opportunity to check in, to adjust, to make sure they were moving forward together rather than simply going through the motions. Number 6. Love stories that inspire. When Nirja and Dinesh celebrated their silver anniversary, they had almost resigned themselves to the idea that their romantic life was behind them. Dinesh's arthritis made many positions uncomfortable, and Nirja had been struggling with changes that left her feeling disconnected from her own body. But instead of accepting defeat, they decided to approach their challenges like the team they'd always been in every other aspect of their marriage. Their transformation began with a simple conversation over morning coffee. Instead of avoiding the topic that had become a source of tension between them, they decided to address it head-on. Nirja admitted that she felt like she was letting Dinesh down, while Dinesh confessed that he was afraid he was no longer the lover she deserved. In that moment of mutual vulnerability, they found the courage to start experimenting together. The modified missionary position changed everything for them. With a pillow supporting Nirja and allowing Dinesh to find a comfortable angle that didn't strain his joints, they rediscovered a connection they thought was lost forever. But more than the physical technique, it was their willingness to communicate openly about what felt good and what didn't that transformed their intimate life. They learned to laugh together when something didn't work, to celebrate together when something did. Ramakant and Rada trouvèrent leur percée dans la position side by side. Après la chirurgie cardiaque de Ramakant, ils pensèrent que leur jour d'intimité physique était assez déterminé. The doctor had cleared him for normal activities, but they were both afraid to push too hard. The side-by-side approach allowed them to be close and connected without putting strain on Ramakant's healing body. More importantly, it gave them time to rediscover each other slowly, to build intimacy gradually, to prove to themselves that love doesn't require the performance of youth. Gopal and Meena discovered that the woman on top position gave Meena the confidence she'd lost after menopause. For months, she'd felt like a passive participant in their intimate life, going through the motions but not really present. When she took control, setting her own pace and finding her own rhythm, she rediscovered not just physical pleasure but a sense of her own power and desirability that had been dormant for years. Each of these couples learned the same fundamental truth. Age had not diminished their capacity for deep, satisfying intimacy. It had simply changed the rules of engagement. When they stopped trying to recreate their younger selves and started honoring who they were now, they found something more precious than they'd ever imagined possible. Number Sept. Your new beginning starts today. Standing at your bedroom door tonight, you have a choice. You can continue accepting that dissatisfaction and distance are simply part of getting older, or you can decide that your story of intimate connection is far from over. The couples you've heard about today weren't special or unique. They were ordinary people who made an extraordinary decision to refuse to let time write the final chapter of their love story. The techniques you've learned about aren't complicated medical procedures or expensive solutions. They're simple adjustments that honor where your bodies are right now, today. A pillow placed thoughtfully, a conversation begun with courage, a willingness to explore together instead of suffering separately. These small changes create ripple effects that transform not just your intimate life, but your entire relationship. Your first step doesn't have to be dramatic or perfect. It can be as simple as having an honest conversation with your partner tonight. Ask them how they're feeling, really feeling, about your intimate connection. Share your own hopes and concerns. Create space for the kind of vulnerability that builds true intimacy. Or perhaps your first step is trying one of the positions you've learned about, approaching it not as a performance but as an exploration you're taking together. Remember that every expert was once a beginner. Every couple who has rediscovered passionate intimacy in their later years started exactly where you are right now, wondering if change was possible, hoping for something better. The difference between couples who transform their intimate lives and those who resign themselves to mediocrity isn't talent or luck. It's the willingness to take that first small step toward each other. Your body may have changed, but your capacity for pleasure, for connection, for the kind of intimacy that touches both body and soul, remains vibrant and alive. The question isn't whether you're too old to experience the kind of satisfaction you're longing for. The question is whether you're ready to discover what that satisfaction looks like now, in this season of your life, with all the wisdom and love you've accumulated over the years. Tonight could be the beginning of the most fulfilling chapter of your intimate life together. All you have to do is decide to turn the page. Tonight, you've been reminded of something beautiful and true. Your desire for deep, meaningful intimacy doesn't diminish with age. It simply asks you to approach it with new wisdom, new patience, and new understanding. The silence that may have grown between you and your partner isn't a wall that can't be broken down. It's simply waiting for one of you to speak the first honest word, to extend the first gentle invitation back to each other. What you've learned today goes far beyond techniques or positions. You've discovered that communication can transform frustration into fulfillment. That small adjustments made with love and attention can unlock pleasure you thought was lost forever. That your changing bodies aren't obstacles to overcome, but landscapes to explore together with curiosity and care. When you honor where you are now instead of mourning where you used to be, intimacy becomes richer, deeper, more meaningful than it ever was in your younger years. The couples whose stories you heard today started exactly where you are right now. They faced the same doubts, The same physical changes, the same quiet disappointments. But they refused to accept that their best days were behind them. They chose courage over resignation, connection over silence, hope over surrender. Which of these truths did you most need to hear today? Was it that age doesn't disqualify you from passion? That communication can heal what silence has wounded? Or que de simples changements peuvent créer une transformation profonde? Si ce message a touché votre cœur, veuillez le partager avec quelqu'un qui a besoin d'entendre ça aussi. Your story of rediscovered intimacy could be the light that guides another couple home to each other. Remember, every sunset promises a new dawn. Your love story is still being written, and the most beautiful chapters may be yet to come.